Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Hanan Morsi. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and I'm really honored and delighted to be moderating today's panel and side event on promotion of inclusive and effective international tax cooperation. We are joined by a great and distinguished panel. Let me just start by introducing my panel. We have my dear brother, Jamal Garib, who is the African Union Commission Director for Economic Development, Integration, and Trade. We're also joined by Daniel Noor, who's the head of tax policy unit at the Ministry of Finance of Ghana. We're also joined by Ms. Regina Chinamasa, Commissioner General of Revenue Authority in Zimbabwe. And we're also joined by Maria Mote, Secretary of State for Finance and Budget in Equatorial Guinea. We're also joined by Ms. Mary Bain, Deputy Executive Secretary of African Tax Administration Forum, and Ms. Chinai, Executive Director of the Tax Justice Network Africa. Today we will be discussing a really key issue that has been, culminates in this UN convention that we'll be discussing, but this has been a journey that has started many years ago. And it's a very important issue that requires our attention and collective action. Let me recall that perhaps in the fourth session of this conference, of the Conference of Ministers, by the ECA and the African Union Commission in 2011, ECA was tasked to establish a high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, which really was causing huge leakages of resources. The high-level panel was chaired by the former South African President Mbeki, and published a report in 2015 that called for facilitating taxation of multinational companies in accordance with where their activities reside. ECA has actually called for blocking these leakages in domestic resources and advocated for the recommendations by the panel. And that was followed by several studies that were undertaken by the Commission. We are especially concerned with instances of tax avoidance and evasion, of course, issues of trade misinvoicing and misreporting, and the ways in which we can really reduce these activities. ECA studies indicated that reforms, of course, are needed in terms of global governance structures and in terms of also equitable and fair distribution of tax responsibilities as well as tax benefits, and to strengthen international cooperation in that regard. Some of these studies also indicated that challenges posed by digital economy to traditional models and called for measures to ensure that multinational digital cooperation pay their fair share of taxation in countries where they operate. In addition, the current international tax system, which some of the efforts have really been dominated by OECD, had been in a way, overseen or led by just a quarter of the world countries. And we have been talking over the last 3 years about the need for Africa to move from rule-taking to rule-making and participate in the process. And this is really at the essence of what we're trying to discuss now. For the whole formation of that system to be a collective action rather than driven by a few. In that vein, the African Ministers of Finance, if I may recall, in May 2022, in earlier Conference of Ministers, passed a resolution to develop a capacity training work on tax-related matters and build capacity of member states to tackle illicit financial flows. And in response to that, also the African group in New York pushed for the UN General Assembly to adopt a resolution 77/244 to begin discussions promoting inclusive and effective taxation. We have also been closely coordinating and working closely with the African Union through a specialized technical committee to further bring to the attention of member states the ongoing evolution in the international tax system and to call for highlighting issues and options to address the needs of member states. Different reports were produced and on November 22nd of last year, the second committee adopted a resolution on promotion of inclusive and effective international cooperation, which was passed with an overwhelming majority of 125 countries, with 48 countries against. This was followed by December of last year UN General Assembly resolution, which brings us here today. We are delighted that 4 African countries are actually in the ad hoc drafting committee to follow up on this resolution, namely Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, and Morocco. And they will be drafting the terms of reference for and the protocol for the UN Framework Convention on Tax Cooperation. And we're also glad to have the group also chaired by Egypt in that regard. The ad hoc committee now requires the support from African continent and broader global south to be able to really push the realization of this historic reform. And we will also stand ready to support. And therefore, I'm really delighted that we have in the panel one of those members of the ad hoc drafting committee here with us, Mr. Daniel, who will help us to kind of tell us how to help. And also we have the African Union, we have various tax authorities around the continent, as well as CSOs and ATF. So I warmly welcome you to this event, and I look forward to our discussion in this regard. So let me, following this framing, let me start with a question to Mr. Daniel, who actually is a member of this drafting committee, to elaborate on how we can actually help in terms as African countries, what support you need from us, and what support can ECA provide. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Anan, and good morning to everybody. Just a little additional background before I go to a direct question. As was mentioned, the resolution requires that there should be an ad hoc committee that will determine the terms of reference for the convention. The convention is structured such that there will be a framework convention, and out of that convention, then we'll have some specific protocols on the various issues that we need to discuss. And in line with that, the ad hoc committee has up to August basically to put together the report, which will submit to the General Assembly later in the year. Now, the terms of reference and the sessions, terms of reference should contain basically procedural elements, some structural elements, and some initial protocols that could be looked at. And in doing that, there's the committee has issued, the bureau of the committee has issued a request to all member states of the UN who have any inputs to provide some statements on it, up to about 2,000 words, to submit to the committee by the 15th of March. And then based on that, the first session will look at these elements and finalize it in August. Now, what's coming out, and it started a bit before the resolution was even passed, is that it seems to have there seems to be some, should I say, entrenched positions. In the sense that some section of the global north, we will put it that way, against some section of the global south. Now, for the treaty to work is something that we need a lot more cooperation. And so that's one of the things which basically we'll all need to work towards, both at the government level, even at the technical level, how we can get that cooperation that we need. There was, for anybody who followed the discussion on UN TV when the session was going on, there was this issue about decision making, which actually took quite a lot of time to come to some compromise on. At the end of the day, we came out with a wording that everybody could agree on, but then it took out most of the end. It's part of what we really need to look at in terms of the advocacy we need at our level of our ministers to get that consensus working. The other thing that really was a challenge, and I'll look at the challenges, I'll come back to them later, was also the stakeholder engagements, making sure that all stakeholders have some say in it. And it's not restricted to just, should I say, the vocal stakeholders. And so at our level, at our countries, we need to start looking at our tax systems in relation to international taxation and the subject matters which we believe would be of interest and should be in the framework. The terms of reference is just the first part of it. It will talk about how these things should be done, the structures and elements as I mentioned. But then it's something we need to work in towards, because once the report of the ad hoc committee is accepted by the GA later in the year, then the next step will be the actual negotiations on the framework. And so we need to start working over the continent. Here, I think I should acknowledge the work that the EU Commission, UNECA, and ATAF and the other agencies have done to bring us this far. They've brought us together, they've brought us together as a continent, they've pushed for a lot of the things that have been done. And it's important that we continue and even forge more closer links as we go forward. Because this is an opportunity for us, basically as the Global South, to make sure that our voice is heard and our issues looked at. The current international structure is such that there are a few of the things that we as Africans basically would look at that are not. For example, extractives is not on the table, but on our continent, the extractives is a big issue. And so this is an opportunity for us to get some of these things that we've looked at already on the table. IFFs was part of the resolution that we should look at IFFs. Cross-border services was looked at. But there's one trend which is gradually gaining ground in terms of IFFs, which we might not have considered, such as crypto assets, which is something we should also be looking at, because going forward it will become issues. So in a nutshell, these are some of the things that we need to look at as a continent as going forward. And I'm sure as we go on the discussions, there'll be a few more things. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can turn now to Professor Chirini, the Secretary to the Treasury in Malawi, and I'd like to ask you regarding issues of how digitalization can enable multinational enterprises to carry out their businesses in Africa with very limited physical presence in the countries. Based on your experience, how African countries can use this new trend of e-commerce and avoid losing a promising source of revenue and potential source of financing for development.
Thank you very much. For many people in this room, perhaps this is the first time you have seen me. I'm happy to be with everyone here. Let me give a 2-minute background to why we are grappling with this issue. It's an issue to do with productivity. The Global South is unable to produce most of the commodities that we should be producing. And then there has been a proliferation of what you would want to call multinational corporations. They are there. And they are in jurisdictions which have very strong ICT infrastructure, very good connectivity as well. So they are able to connect to us in this part of the world, and they are able to sell commodities via the internet and other ways. And because we don't have very strong ICT infrastructure, we don't have very good connectivity as well, we are losing out. I am a secretary to the Treasury, a Treasury which should be rich. It should be having resources, should have money. That money should be coming from taxes. I'm looking at Regina here. She's one of the people we depend on to do the collections. Now, if the technology is beating us, it means that we are not going to have the resources that we need for us to help the provision of the so much needed services to our people. We want to build many schools, the roads. We talk about general infrastructure, which is not very good. We can't do it if we don't have the resources. And so we need to develop those strategies. Now, e-commerce is good. It's very good. But if you can't tax when commerce is happening, then you're in trouble. So, Chair, we need really to come up with a number of strategies. Of course, we know that some countries are having those attempts to go into that. We know in Kenya they are trying. But many countries within the region, or in Africa in particular, are not doing it. Regina and friends, they believe that people are rational. They would like to pay taxes. I don't know if I am rational and therefore I want to pay taxes, but not many people are that rational. And therefore, believing that everyone is going to come in the open and declare that this is how much they made through e-commerce and then they're going to pay their taxes may not work. We need to work on our infrastructure, the ICT infrastructure. If anybody is going to help Africa, it's pretty much in terms of the connectivity. But it's not just the connectivity, but also the ability to track who is doing what. That is very important. The second aspect is what we have seen, the proliferation of payment systems that are really innovative to the extent that they are beating central banks and the treasuries. People are now able to use cryptocurrency to pay. If people are paying via cryptocurrency, it means it's difficult for you to track them. And so even how you are going to pay taxation is going to become to be a difficult thing as well. And therefore, the move that started in Nigeria about central bank digital currencies is perhaps one move that needs to be looked at carefully within Africa as well. Because maybe that's one way in which we can begin to track the payments, as it were, or the commerce, as it were, and then we'll be able to tax. Other than that, really, you want to depend on a sociological aspect. where people are going to be encouraged to pay taxes. I don't know how you're going to do that. I hope everyone can be told to say taxes are good if you want a good road and therefore pay tax. But I don't think somebody who is masquerading as as a multinational organization or enterprise, they would be willing to do so. We have just presented our budget in Malawi last week, and we got a lot of advice in terms of which votes to increase in terms of expenditure, but we had no advice in terms of how are we going to get more revenue. None of that. And we had a lot of people coming to us. These are corporations telling us that no, you are killing us. You can't charge more tax on this one. And these are in the category of the multinationals, and that's physical. But in the cyberspace, we have had no one coming to complain anything. Why? Because they are not paying any which way. So pretty much, I hope the plenary here is going to help us to come up with more strategies of getting such individuals to pay taxes. Otherwise, digitalization is the best way to go in terms of commerce. It is the best way, but if our infrastructure is not good, we are not getting anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've really highlighted issues of capacity to track, and in order to be able to tax digital activities and e-commerce, the issue of how even complexity when you have also digital currencies involved, and how do you build the incentives to actually encourage more tax paying. Thank you very much. I think that came on top of all the issues that Daniel has highlighted in terms of the need for advocacy, the North-South dialogue, and the complexity also introduced by crypto assets. So very good and insightful points. Let me now move to Commissioner Regina and ask you, what role do you see for South-South cooperation among developing countries in their efforts to have a more just and inclusive international taxation system? What can be done? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And coming from a tax administration role, your worst nightmare is how do you ensure that you effectively collect the revenues? Discussions have been around how do you balance local domestic resource mobilization, focusing at the local entities vis-a-vis the multinational. But I think we are facing issues around illicit financial flows and coming through aggressive tax evasion and tax planning. And when you then look at it and the structure, the international tax system, it doesn't give scope for revenue authorities or tax collectors in the South-South to be effective, because the international framework has already provided the impediments to tax the multinationals. If you note from UNCTAD, it's showing that the top 100 multinational enterprises are resident in the global north. So how do I tap into a very organized, well-structured, already policy-supported enterprise who employ highly skilled tax planners? So I'm coming in, I'm from the global south, and I'm trying to unlock taxing rights that have already been protected through the international taxation laws. And I'm trying to unbundle the structures, the complex structures that moves money from the global south to the global north. So when you look at it, You then need a concerted effort coming in from regional groupings groupings, looking at the South-South. And I'm happy, I was really excited on the resolution that was made in December, which gave us scope for us to look at what we require as the South-South. What is it that we can do to influence the international rules setting at that forum? So my comments would be, for us to be effective in ensuring that we effectively tax the multinationals, we also tap into the digital economy that Professor Chicheni was talking about. We need to have a strong support coming through from member states, and this support is there to ensure that we push for inclusivity. You spoke earlier on and said there are 4 big countries which are looking at the TORs. What about the smaller countries? Where does Zimbabwe, for example, come in? We don't want to be left behind. Malawi doesn't want to be left behind. If you look at the current tax to GDP contribution, we need to up our game. So issues of inclusivity are critical. Bring on board every member, in spite and despite their sizes, ensure that we're moving at the same wavelength. And we understand and we contribute to the terms of reference through other forums. For example, you've got ATAF. I think ATAF has been there supporting all member states to ensure that we are knowledgeable on what is happening on the international forum. Our voice is also heard and represented at the international forum. So issues of inclusivity are critical as we move forward. We also want to see the Global South pushing for simplicity. Taxation is a very complex field. Yes, you can speak of moral suasion, but when you introduce the dimension of complexity, it becomes totally different. And that's why you have highly specialized tax teams managing these multinationals. So what we want is simplicity to ensure that even the list of the Global South members are able to adapt and be able to implement and collect and optimize revenue collections within the international tax rules. We also want to push, this one I am a very strong advocate. I always say, when you move monies across borders, who's getting the taxing rights? If I don't get the taxing rights, definitely somebody's benefiting from the taxing rights. So we want to see a push to ensure equitable allocation of taxing rights. If I don't have taxing rights, I know the meeting for the past 3 days has been talking about revenue mobilization. If I don't have taxing rights, there's nothing I can do more. I need those taxing rights. So what I'm asking for is for the Global South to push for adequate taxing rights that ensures that the revenue administration or the countries in the South-South are capacitated to collect. Because without the taxing rights, it becomes a mere talk show. So for me, Global South should look at more collaboration. It should look at capacitating its members, and above all, ensure that we get a fair share of the taxing rights so that we can effectively collect revenues on behalf of our states. I would also say, if you look at contribution in terms of revenues of these multinationals, probably they might be doing upwards of 50, 60% in terms of actual contribution. So if I have already lost 60% of total contribution, I'm basically scrounging on the 40 or less than 50%. But is it adequate for us to fund all these initiatives that we're looking at? Maybe not. So collaboration, capacitation, and ensuring that we get a fair cake of the taxing right, I think for me will be the best way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner Regina. I think very good point. You've raised very good points in terms of the need for support for inclusivity, and highlighting also the complexity of the issue in terms of ability to also adapt and implement what would be agreed, and highlighting the importance of defining well the taxation rights and the need for more collaboration in Global South to build capacity and to ensure a fair share. I think we have probably also a very good momentum that we can utilize with the fact that we had the Global South in a continuum heading the G20 group. We had before, India and Indonesia, now we have Brazil, then South Africa. I think that provides also a momentum to utilize this to advance the Global South collaboration, to push hard on this agenda. And of course, with the African Union seat in the G20, that is a huge momentum of opportunity to foster this type of collaboration was very specific. So perhaps this can be part of the things that we need to build into the G20 discussions and collaboration framework. Many thanks. I'd like now to move to Ms. Maria, the Secretary of State for Finance and Budget in Equatorial Guinea. And I would like to ask you, in your view, the key issues for African countries that you would like to see in the terms of reference for the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation in order to improve revenue collection and in African countries' jurisdiction, and what role do you see for ECA and the African Union on how we can help? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hannah. Dear colleagues, I'd like to make my presentation in Spanish, which is one of the most popular languages in UN, but we missed the translation in Spanish, so I will try my best in English. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the economic, political, and social conditions of today's world compel countries to establish integration blocks. Each region has unique requirements, and support implementation should be tailored to this context to achieve the greatest impact possible. The socio-economic landscape is in constant state of flux, marked by emergence of new tax paradigms within international organizations aimed at curbing tax evasion and avoidance by multinational corporations, particularly those operating within Africa. Our nations bear the brunt of corporate tax malpractice, leading to the annual loss of the list of 483 billion in the tax revenue in developing countries. However, they are often excluded from decision-making processes regarding tax regulation, which are mainly directed by Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and represented by the most developed countries. For this reason, it is important to support the adoption of the UN resolution that contributes to promoting fair international tax cooperation between Africa, the Global South, and developed countries. Therefore, the President of the African Union must have sufficient real executive power to lawfully represent Africa in international forums. Our continent urgently needs additional revenue, as evidenced by the pre-pandemic average tax collection rate of 60%, pointedly lower than the 34% for OECD countries and 23% for Latin American countries. Low-income countries have especially serious challenges. making renewed efforts for increased income is essential to restore fiscal sustainability, address to the cost of living crisis, and achieve the sustainable development goals. But why does this gap exist? What measures can be taken to develop opportunities? On a continental scale, in this case in Africa, the prevalent lack of progressive taxation often results in the richest individuals in our communities evading their tax obligation, worsening social disparities. On an international tax framework, many of the rules that form a basic of the international tax system were developed around a century ago by developed countries. Actually, the reforms of the tax law of the countries of the Global South are essential to guarantee the proper functioning of tax services and promote fiscal justice. Therefore, a new round of negotiation of international tax cooperation with the support of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is becoming so necessary to help Africa reach to the more balanced, clear, and effective international tax system. International corporate tax reform will generate significant and sustainable incomes not only for African countries, but for the whole global South. It is therefore appropriate to address the issue of cross-border international taxation with regard to the digital economy. We need to adopt comprehensive and effective strategy to tax mega companies operating in digital markets to ensure a more equitable distribution of our rights. It will not be an easy task given because many of the world's largest digital technology companies are based in developed countries. Therefore, it is necessary to multinationals to start paying their fair share of taxes in the African and global South countries where they make their profits. No African country has the political, demographic, or economic power to influence international negotiation on its own. And it's for this reason that ECA is well positioned to support the African continent in addressing this issue for an equitable tax system. We must request the support of other regional groups such as Latin American and Caribbean Regional Platform for Tax Cooperation in favor of new inclusive UN Convention on International Tax Cooperation. I mean the exchange of knowledges and experiences of tax policy. Support should be reflected in the dialogue that developing countries maintain with international organizations such as ECA on tax issues through the connected initiatives, like inclusive international standards harmonized with each region, training programs designed for the countries, guidance by world-class experts in tax policy and administration, and connection between international organization and regional tax organization. Stronger fiscal rules require better pointed social safety to protect the most vulnerable citizens and must also contain overall spending growth in the face of social forces and governments are likely to face to offset of the increasing cost of living. International fiscal cooperation will balance need with growth and poverty decrease with the need for the fiscal sustainability in the face of the crisis tendency. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for your intervention. I think you've highlighted well the issue of the need for inclusivity and the design of the international tax system, the issue of wealth taxation related to illicit financial flows, and a very important issue regarding multinationals, the fact that even though they reside in the global north, most of their profit are made in the global south. So how can we actually ensure that they are taxed where they make most of the profit? And just an idea that came to my mind here, and I'll leave it to Daniel to comment later, is the issue that we can also require in the disclosure for these multinational companies that they disclose the location of the profits. I mean, they're obliged to do annual disclosures. Part of that annual disclosure can include disclosing where their profit come from by region and even by country. I think it would be hard to object to that, except if there are other intentions. So I think that would be perhaps one of the things that can help in that regard. And then also you've highlighted how much these resources can actually be put into better use. The estimates that were done earlier by 2015 shows that annually the losses amounted to $88 billion annually. Let me put that in context. It's 2.5 times what the continent receives in official development assistance. So while we go ask for concessional and aid, we're actually losing 2.5 times of what we, actually rightfully owed to us. So I think that puts it in perspective of the importance of today's discussion, and that amount can help basically close 1/3 of the needs for SDG investments. So I could not agree with you more, and of course we will be happy as ECA to support in the areas that you referred to in terms of capacity building and a harmonized framework. Thank you very much. I'd like to now move to my dear brother, Jamal, from the African Union, and to ask him what is the African Union plan in supporting the ad hoc committee and African member states' participation, given the significance of this resolution and the opposition. It has not been an easy road, and it's not going to be going forward. So how can you support to really move forward with that framework to optimize Africa's benefits? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hasnan Morsi. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, good morning. So greetings from the African Union Commission. Allow me just first to really thank UNECA for inviting us for this important, I think, dedicated session. Allow me also to really recognize our really partners who are working really on the field. The African Tax Administration Forum, ATAF, and the Tax Justice Network Africa, TGNA, with whom really we are working very closely. And thanks again for their outstanding result on the ground. Going back to the question which was asked by my sister, the chair. Let me be very straight. There is a talking points which were prepared, but I'm going to go a little bit outside this. When the first draft was submitted in November, I looked at that resolution and I found it was really a fair one, and it was very inclusive. And it's really bring the OECD inside the picture, and I thought that it is a very fair resolution. Then I read the second amendment, which came in December. And then I found that our OECD people, or OECD partners, were pushing a little bit back that proposal. And then there came the vote. When the vote happened, first thing that came is I received on my WhatsApp a very interesting, really voting screen where the OECD, most of them, they have really rejected they have really vote no or reject the proposal. And of course, from the other side, the South has really voted positively for that resolution. And then I have asked myself, then those OECD colleagues, we keep collaborating, working with them. And I found this is really the final, really one of the final battle, and this is the reality. The reality, what they are telling us sometimes is not really as we thought, or it's not really the truth. And this is where we go back about what we call the writings, the tax writings between the fair one, between the transnational, the one that are, of course, investing in the country, and what is declared, as Dr. Hannah Monsi mentioned, what is the tricky things that they are doing, and we have to be very honest again. And the things that is on the ground that most of the multinational, especially when it comes to the investment, they are using one of their really way to get more evasion of taxes is reason to use to EPC, engineering, procurement, and construct principle. It means that you give them the whole project to them to implement that project, and this is where the three things start between them as investing in the country and the way they do their accounting. The more you look inside and the more you dig, the more you analyze, the more you found unbelievable things that most, as the taxing rights, most of them are getting outside in a legal manner, not in an illegal manner, legal manner, but the way it was done, because everything was done driven by the OECD, it was not driven by us. And this is where, as I mentioned, this is where AUC, UNECA stand together really to work now to provide support to our ambassador, the African ambassador sitting there in New York. And we have been, of course, we have already submitted our position, the African position related to that issue, and we are supporting. So this is where we are. I would like just to have started really to give the overall reality, and then we go inside maybe what can we do looking forward. What can we do looking forward really is to partner. First of all, as South-South. And what Nigeria, through all the other African countries have submitted is not only for us, it's not only for Africa, it's really for the South, to have an equitable, really balanced approach when it comes to the taxing rights. And this is something that we believe we need really to push for it all together, united and targeting the same objective. The OECD, they will be ready. They are ready already, and they are, of course, having very intensive consultation among them. And I am anticipating a very difficult discussion and negotiation. Very, very difficult one. When I say difficult, it's not difficult because these are very, very well prepared negotiators they will bring on the table. And from our side, we need to have the same or better really negotiators. And we need really, it's not only that we support our ambassadors, but we have to have that technical team really dedicated from, as I mentioned, UNECA, AUC, TGNA, ATAF, all of us. Really, we need to support our ambassador in New York because the battle is there. It has moved from Africa to there. And those negotiators, not only about tax, it's a legal, it's a trade issue. And we need those very talented, we have talented African really technocrats and very brilliant really experts. We need to bring them. And this is, I can really mention it now, this is a commitment from our side, from UNECA. We will go through that, and I'm not afraid from any battle, I will go. And the more important is to assure that we go united. Because OECD, what they are going to try to do, they will try really to use either our division or to take whatever is weak among the South and try really to play with. But for me, again, this is an issue of really our future. Because those taxes that fly out from Africa, we need really to retain them as much as possible. At least at this level of the multinational companies. I'm talking now about multinational. If you talk about the national, we are trying really to do a lot at the African side, from African side. There is a very important report or work which is being undertaken by the African Union Commission, looking to the FIUs, the Financial Intelligence Unit, really among all the countries. We found that some of the countries they do not have, some of them they do have, but very weak structure. We need really to bring the FIUs to work together. Where is it established? We need to strengthen. Where it doesn't exist, we need really to set up. The FIUs, their role is very simple, to exchange information among them and to get the right information related to the companies first, and the way the companies are operating, especially multinational one. I'm talking about multinational outside, how they are operating, about to make that profit shift very easily, and how they do it. So for us, really, it's FIUs is something we are working a lot, and I can tell you this is one of our flagship deliverable. I think we'll be really working a lot to get it. There is another initiative that we are working really to come up with a strategic plan about IFF. We found there are so many actors, key actors, but we are not working in a very harmonized and targeting a certain really objectives. So we are coming with that strategic plan, 5 years, where all the stakeholders mapped, we will map them, we will come, we will coordinate our effort, because the more we coordinate, the more we will have that impact in New York. But the less we are less coordinated, this is what I have noticed now, the less we will have that impact. So for me, coordination is very important. Definitely, I think just in terms of, again, working with our, the UNEC, I think, and the member states, I'll go back again, strengthening our negotiation skills. Really something that, again, I mention it, I re-mention it, I will mention it throughout and of course, looking to the OECD inclusive tax framework, we have a lot to say there, and we need, of course, to bring the African tax authority to work more closely together, and really to build our position going forward to to New York during those the calendar that was mentioned by our distinguished representative from Ghana. And I'll stop here. I think I have some other comments maybe later. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Many thanks, Jamal. I think you've highlighted a number of very important points. Of course, taking into account the opposition that we have to the resolution and the need for South-South partnership to ensure equitable and balanced approach. And I think it's a very good point about the capacity, raising the capacity of our negotiators and being supported by technical teams on all aspects, legal, tax, and trade. And I think also there is a need even at national level, because to have very close coordination between the representatives in New York, where they tend to be from foreign affairs, and the ministries of finance in each country. They need to be like very well coordinated. They need to ensure at a national level that there are no silos, and that the views that are expressed in New York really build on the technical capacities and ministries of finance in Africa. And of course, we have seen it, with the global financial reform. It makes a huge difference whether we have our ability to develop a common voice matters for action to get done. So I think that's a key area that we will need to consistently work on, to coordinate and bring the common voice to these concerns. Thank you. And now I'd like to move to the Deputy Executive Secretary for ATAF, Ms. Mary. And ATAF has played a critical role in raising Africa concerns in international tax cooperation. Given your role in this process, how has ATAF engaged, and what do you see as its role in supporting the process? And again, based on previous experience, what would you consider as the best strategies for African countries to achieve the objective of more inclusive and effective international taxation.
Thank you very much, Chair, and a very good morning to everyone. I want to start by thanking UNECA for the kind invitation to ATAF and to also recognize our key partners in this work, with the African Union Commission that's leading the effort, and of course, our partners, UNECA, Tax Justice Network Africa, and of course, we serve our members. ATAF has a membership of 42 countries, and so it is a pleasure to be here with Madame Regina Chiramasa, because she was able to actually highlight the key elements that we are dealing with, because when all is said and done, and listening to what was said over the last 2-3 days, the gist of what we are doing is domestic resource mobilization, and what we are trying to fight for is the ability and the rights to mobilize that revenue. And so it is really a pleasure to be here on this panel discussing how we can use this rare opportunity to try and fight back for these rights, because we have, as the African Tax Administration Forum over the years, we are in our 15th year of operation. Over the years, we have constantly voiced the absence of equitable taxing rights. We have constantly voiced the lack of equitability in the allocation of profits, and we have voiced the complexity of the rules that govern the tax world. Everybody has talked about the history, Chair. I will not go into that, but I want to quickly go to the issues that you spoke about, which is what ATAF is doing. And I speak from a point of where we have been supporting the standard setting process over the last 10 years, both at the OECD and at the UN through the UN Tax Committee. And I think the issues that the director from the African Union Commission and the ones raised earlier on by the speakers are real issues that need to be looked at. And what is clear is that while as Africa we have really worked hard to try and strengthen our technical capacity, the political side, I'm afraid to say, is still wanting. And that will be really the gist of what I'm going to say that we need to do and we need to work on as Africa as we go into the UN process. So, Madam Chairperson, in terms of what ATAF is doing at the UN, we have been providing support because, like I said, we have gained experience from the previous discussions that were going on and that are still going on anyway at the OECD, and that is what we take to the UN. And so we have given different inputs into the process, the UNSG report, and also we have been providing inputs to the team that is in New York, the African group, and of course, most importantly, to the African Union Commission, who is our lead in this. And I cannot stress it enough that it is critical that we all rally our efforts together and agree to work as a continent together, because one of the key areas that the director talked about was the issue of coordination. And so what we have done as ATAF is work closely with the African Union Commission so that we're sure that the areas that we want, that need to be focused on, are focused on in unison, and that we don't have fragmented efforts. I want to say that as the process evolves, our take as ATAF is that we try to avoid some of the challenges that we had in the past. And so what we have been doing currently is advocacy, moving around the different regions of the continent to try and help people understand what the actual issues are. And the actual issues are that while 27 of our members have been negotiating for taxing rights in Paris, very little was obtained. I can say that very confidently because as ATAF, we were leading or we were supporting the countries at individual level and we were supporting even the members who are part of the steering group of the inclusive framework. The second thing that we have been doing, other than the submissions that I talked about, is the regional consultations. And even at that level, it is clear that individual countries have not gotten to a level where they are fully engaged in terms of what is going to happen in New York and what countries need to do. The second issue so what we are doing is explaining the process, trying to explain the challenges that we had in the previous negotiations and what we see, because we actually think that this is a dream come true. It is a rare opportunity that we must all embrace to try and see if we can gain this back. So we have been also encouraging collaborative engagements. But what I really want to go to is the strategies. What do we think? How do we see as ATAF, as people who have been involved in this day and night, what do we see as the strategies that we need to really tap into? Before I go into the strategies, I want to just highlight about 3 challenges that we had, Chair, in the previous discussions and in the ones that are still ongoing. One was the insufficient participation of African countries. As I said, in the inclusive framework, there are 27 members from Africa. Of the 27, the ones who were participating or engaging at an optimal level were 4. I can confidently say that. Everybody else was there, but it got to a point where it was so complex and it was so fast-paced that it was very difficult for a delegation of just 2 people to come in and engage the Americans, who had a delegation of about 40 people at any given time, and they were fighting for the same rights. So even as ATAF, we had to provide written inputs to the different countries and to engage them in briefing sessions to make sure that when we go in, we go with a common voice. But even that was really, really complex. The second issue was the limitation. And I can't remember, one of the speakers talked about the issues of capacity. The tax negotiations were very complex. Even as we go into this, we must be ready for that. And we're competing this time. I'm glad that it has already been put on the table, that we are already going into a process where war has been declared. We were in a discussion a few weeks ago where there was already a suggestion that we should use the OECD as a secretariat for the whole process. And our argument was, why would we want to use that when we didn't get what we wanted from the whole process? I've already talked about the fast pace and the others. So what are our proposals in terms of going forward? I cannot overemphasize the issue of a coordinated common response to the issues that will be raised at the UN. And Dr. Grib did mention this, and I'm really, really delighted to see that the African Union is leading us in this. So we need to rally behind this and make sure that the expertise that every organization has will feed into this process. The second issue is the issue that I talked about, and I'm really, really humbled to see the honorable ministers in the audience. I want to talk about the issue of tax policy and the issue of the need of policy direction, and I did talk about this. So again, I'm borrowing from the example of what has been happening at the OECD, where the negotiations and the discussions were between us and the OECD, and the OECD countries. And the OECD countries came in, even though they negotiated with individual or sovereign interests, they came with an already agreed position at the G20 level. So the G20 sat, gave them direction, gave them guidance, and they came to negotiate based and premised on that guidance. But what of our African brothers and sisters, the 27 members that I was talking about? Everybody went at an individual level, and we tried to rally along to come and get that common position. It became much better when the African Union came in and provided direction. And that is why we're able to provide some of the proposals, even though they weren't taken as a whole, but at least some of it was done. The next area is coordinated stakeholders. I've already spoken about that, but it is also important for us to go seeking global benefits as opposed to seeking just continental benefits. because otherwise it will not work and we will not be able to mobilize the other parts of the world. So it is critical. And I can tell you that some of the gains, including the recent publication of the transfer pricing guidelines and the amount being of Pillar 1 under the OECD process, it was just because we had different lobbying capacities and different alliances that were able to pass some of that, so it is important. It is also important that we avoid getting the ad hoc committee, and I liked what Daniel was saying, into technical stuff at this point. Let us first get the framework right, and then we can go into the technical stuff. But when all is said and done, it is critical that we get political direction and go into this process as one. So having common positions will definitely help us to get much better results. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks. I think you've really highlighted a number of key issues in terms of the need to build up this political support and direction and to go as one. The issue of finding this common ground, if I may put it differently. So not only from a continental perspective gain, but globally, how can we identify these areas that has global benefits so that we can rally the rest of the global south and perhaps others as well. Of course, I mean, the issue of the fact that you have the active engagement is only few countries. How can we build the capacities and the engagement to have more African countries engaging more actively? And we appreciate the support and the advocacy that you have been providing. I'd like to now turn, last but not least, to Ms. Chinai, the Executive Director for Tax Justice Network Africa, and taking into account that this has been not an easy journey to come where we are now, and it's only going to get more difficult moving forward. How can CSOs play a role and support us to take the agenda forward? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mosi, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak on this panel. Just to reiterate what you've just highlighted, Dr. Mosi, it hasn't been an easy journey for us to get to where we are now. In fact, I think it's important to reiterate that when we consider where we are today, it truly is a historic and momentous occasion. And the reason I say this is because the current global financial architecture that we're discussing today was established before many African countries were even in existence. And because of that, the rules that underpin the current global financial architecture are not skewed in our favor. The minute developing countries had an opportunity to contribute to decision-making, they began to ask for the reallocation of taxing rights, for the establishment of a tax body, but this didn't gain traction. And it was a result of that conversation not finalizing itself that we then saw the OECD begin to take the lead in this current tax conversation. The reason I say this is to highlight the fact that the discussion we are having today that is currently being spearheaded by African countries is not a new one. It is decades long, but we find ourselves at an opportunity to actually now reform the current system that, if not addressed, undermines our ability to engage in domestic resource mobilization. And so one of the things that is important to mention when we have this discussion is that the current rule makers, to borrow from the language Dr. Mosi was highlighting, exists of 38 countries that currently have the power within the current architecture. And we have an opportunity to create an inclusive and much more equitable system. And so with regards to some of what we would like to see as civil society, it's nothing different from what developing countries, what African countries have been calling for the past few decades. The first thing is that what we would like to see from the Framework Convention is the establishment of principles of tax cooperation that speak to equality, that speak to transparency, and that speak to universality. At present, almost half of all African countries have no say when we're looking at the rulemaking as far as the tax system is concerned. And so it's important that as we're thinking about the Framework Convention, these foundational principles are at the core. Secondly, it's important that we establish a governance structure, a structure that is inclusive and allows all member states to participate in the agenda setting. We need an inclusive decision-making body, one where all countries are participating on an equal footing. I was listening to Commissioner General Chinamasa mention just now that in the current system, where do you see the voice of countries such as Zimbabwe, for example? Right now, what is being pushed for at the United Nations could potentially create a platform where all countries' voices can be heard. The third thing we would like to see from the Framework Convention is a convention that is cognizant of the needs and priorities of developing countries. Currently, the system that we have, as I mentioned earlier, is skewed in the favor of developed countries. And as such, many developing countries struggle to meet the expectations, the rules, the regulations that are at play. We have an opportunity now, by including the voices of developing countries in decision-making, to create a system that allows and is cognizant, as I mentioned, of the priorities and needs of developing countries. The fourth thing that is important to mention that could also be part of this Framework Convention is that when you think about tax, you cannot think of it as a siloed issue. It's important to think about tax as it relates to trade, as it relates to social and economic justice issues, even as it relates to environmental issues, drawing from the session that we had earlier this morning. Having this conversation at the United Nations makes it easy to establish these linkages because this is the fora where all of these other conversations are being had. And then the fifth thing that we would like to see as far as the Framework Convention is concerned is an establishment of a platform, a structure that has the principles that the conversation about more specific, on where the conversation about more specific issues can be had. So one of the points that was raised earlier is that we cannot be delving into technical issues right now. What we need to do is establish the base, following which we can then have conversations on important issues, such as protocols on illicit financial flows. It was also mentioned by Daniel now that one of the conversations that's rarely discussed at the international level is one of extractives. So the extent to which we can have a basic structure that is undergirded by principles, that will serve as the platform on which we can then establish protocols to have more of these technical conversations. As I conclude, I think it's important to recognize that the extent to which we're able to address issues at the global level is important because unless we're able to address various loopholes that exist that many multinational corporations can take advantage of, all that undermines any effort that we may be making at national level. It's important that even as we are addressing and pushing for this issue at New York, that there is full support to the delegates that are in New York from those that are at Capitol. The importance of this conversation, though, just as I end, is that it's more than just a discussion on the global tax system. It's an opportunity for us to begin to question what underpins the entire global financial architecture in a way that is not beneficial for us. It heralds a change that we think could really establish a system whereby African countries, all global South countries, will be able to contribute to decision-making at an equal footing, something that we haven't seen since the establishment of the global financial architecture. Thank you, Dr. Hannon.
Many thanks. I think you've raised very good points in terms of the need to bring other elements of the discussion I think in terms of global economic and social, I think we need to bring more of the human element of what we're talking about, what is being deprived by not fixing that system. And I think, and I mean, I may confess, as economists, sometimes we and policymakers, sometimes we overlook, we talk about the figures, but we don't talk about what does it translate. How does it translate is what can build that advocacy. And I hope that you will be working with both the CSOs in the Global South and in the Global North to push that agenda forward. Many thanks. I think we've really had excellent interventions. I'd like to open the floor for comments or questions from the floor. I'm told that we have limited few minutes remaining, so if we may take maybe 3-4 questions from the floor. I can see already, okay, 5 hands. We'll limit it to the ones that raised their hands first. Okay, okay, you can start with, okay, go ahead, and then the front. The minister, yes, yeah, I mean.
I didn't think I was first.
You're our host, so.
A few quick points. The first one pertains to the tax arbitrage challenges from taxing multinational corporations. There are some solutions, I must say, that in Zimbabwe, for example, we've adopted what you call the domestic minimum top-up tax, DMTT rules, which say that the multinational must pay at least 15% corporate tax, period. If they're paying less, if they're paying 12%, the law allows us to top up that tax back to 15% by that extra 3%. That's it. So if everyone can adopt that, I think we're all good. So as 1st of January this year in Zimbabwe, we've adopted that law. I was reading the budget for South Africa 2 or 3 weeks ago. They've just done the same as well. They adopted the DMTT rules for dealing with tax arbitrage. Coming to the digital economy, there's a great opportunity in the taxation of digital payments. So what we did again here in Zimbabwe, we introduced an intermediated money transfer tax. It's called the 2% tax for short. So we tax transactions digitally. It's a fantastic tax if you're a Minister of Finance. You can every day see how much you're collecting. It's a real-time tax payments, and no one escapes as long as they pay electronically, unless you say so, by giving them exemptions or putting a cap. It's also a Tobin tax in a way. Some of you economists know what a Tobin tax is. It's a tax you use for regulating volatilities in exchange rate and so forth. It also applies there. But there's a conundrum on digitalization, Chair Hanan, that maybe some of the panelists may have an idea or a solution, is the taxation of revenues, of advertising revenues from social media platforms. So if you take YouTube, YouTube is making money out of advertising revenues from Zimbabwe or from Tanzania, from Zambia. How can we get hold of those tax revenues or taxes from that content? It's not easy, but these are multinationals. The world hasn't figured it out yet, but maybe some of you have thought about it. I'm trying to figure it out. I know Uganda has been trying. I even tried to put in some rules and so forth. It's difficult to enforce, but maybe there's a solution out there. If someone has a comment, it'd be fantastic. Finally, it comments from Chennai about extractives. With extractives, we have to push for more beneficiation, because as long as you beneficiate further and further down the line, then your taxation transforms from mere royalties to VAT. Then I get both royalties and VAT. But also what we do with, because some of the deals take place offshore, you just put in a law that says that any deal that takes place offshore, sale from a company operating in Zimbabwe or Namibia or wherever, I want to know as Minister of Finance, and I will charge capital gains tax on that transaction, period. You make it a law, Zapera. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. If we can give the mic to the ES, we can just give it to the ES, please, and then, okay. And then the second row.
Yeah, thank you very much, really. Very difficult to speak after the minister. Very exciting. I just wanted, first of all, to thank all the panelists. Really, this is a very competent team, and what you are saying is right. But I think the way the world works in New York is different. You may say all the good things, you may complain, you may advance the points. I've been there. I wanted just to tell you the story so that you understand how it works. I was co-facilitating the Global Digital Compact. And I had to start with the reason why they wanted someone from the south and someone from the north. So I was there co-facilitating with my sister from Sweden. And as we do that, you wanted to make sure that you start with Africa group. So you go and brief the Africa group. In the Africa group, you find there are some big missions, there are some smaller ones. And most of the capacities are mostly related to foreign affairs and not technical, like what you are discussing here. Now, we look at the people within the Africa group who actually will be able to help others to move along. And we made sure we are coordinated with the African Union Observer Mission. But when you go to other regions, oh my God, that's when you understand how serious our situation is. You find they are saying the same things in different ways, meaning overnight they were coordinated in terms of really how they come to a meeting and how they prepare themselves. So it was so difficult because I had to work with Africa Group, I had to work with G77 plus China. It's 134 countries plus China, which is quite, whatever they agree on, it passes because of the majority. So now, then we are being called to different capitals, Washington, DC, European Union, UK, we went to Japan. It's almost on the move all the time. But once you go there, you find they're organized. We are talking about technology. Some of them, depending on which technology you are talking about, if we are talking, for example, on AI, you find that there is a part of AI that has to be regulated. And there are some countries who are very sensitive on certain issues. So you have to understand that kind of knowledge and then bring it back and provide the capacity. Now, when it comes to this issue, and that's why the presentation by Jamel is very, very important, that you really need to understand this, is that it doesn't matter how wonderful what you're saying is right. What matters is how do we get it to the negotiators for them to influence the final decision? I think that's what matters. And to do that, we start with the African Union Observer Mission. And we need also to start from the African Union. Whatever we are saying, let's compile it together to the African Union Commission. And then let's take the Africa Group Observer Mission in New York. They have Africa Group, they meet on Tuesday and Thursdays, and from there, so that we can be able to discuss, so that they can put a joint committee of technicians who understand this area. And then we are lucky that this time the G77 China is headed by Uganda. So now we have an opportunity this time, so that this time we form there are different groups. Latin American and Caribbeans are much easier to convince. There is Eastern Europe, there is others. It's just a matter of, it's a business of numbers. Now, to do that, we can establish groups within the G77 and working together with the Africa Group. And I think we can win this case, but we need to be better coordinated. And in this case, we can offer the technical support that can prepare the documentation that is required for the negotiation. And then among those people, before they go to the second committee, we have the team already that has the capacity that can be able to lead others at the technical committee before even it goes to the ambassadors. The ambassadors, what you will find is that if you are not well coordinated, some ambassadors are not even there, even in the room when they are negotiating. Their technicians don't have a briefing from the ambassadors, and that becomes very, very serious. And that's why we need to do it in a coordinated manner. Here on the African continent, under the umbrella of the African Union Commission, and in New York, coordinated by the African Union Observer Mission, and then on the G77, coordinated by Uganda. That way it works, and any capacity, any input in terms of the briefs, in terms of the content, once they understand it, I can assure you, we have some key ambassadors, I can mention some by the names, but they know how to shout. They know how to make noise when it comes to African issues, but they must have the information that they require for them to make the right noise. So I think whatever we are saying here, let's also come together and agree on what points that we can give to New York. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who negotiate. They are the ones who, at the technical committee, where you go through all the channels that there is up to the General Assembly. So I think what is very important is for us to be coordinated, to be together, and then assist New York. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Iyas. Very concrete suggestions. We had a question in the second row, if we can just give the mic, and then, yeah. Okay. I mean, you have these two in the second row. Go ahead, since you have the mic, and then, you're standing, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to intervene. I want to appreciate the panelists for a wonderful expose. And my name is Emmanuel Eze. I serve as Senior Tax Advisor to National Tax Policy to ATAF and to African Union. I want to start by acknowledging the leadership of African Union in this process, African Union, African Tax Administration Forum, and the other Pan-African organizations who are supporting the team in New York to ensure that we get the desired outcome. And also to underline the need for Africa to come together to support this process. International taxation or cooperation on international tax cooperation is all about setting rules and standards for taxation of cross-border transactions and MNEs who are the harbingers of these transactions. As the Professor Bechenet pointed out, the MNEs are proliferating, much more so because of digitization of the economy. That means they're increasing in number, and most of them are located in the global north. Some statistics have said more than 80% are in the global north. Africa, being a net importer of capital, is therefore market to these enterprises. Coincidentally, the rules that govern these enterprises as of today is set by institutions in the global north. You could see the seeming conflict of interest that is very apparent. The results have been, you have such rules that says you could not tax these enterprises unless they have fiscal presence in your jurisdictions. And because of digitization, as many of them as possible do not need to have fiscal presence. Example is mentioned by our finance minister here, who pointed at the YouTube example. YouTube can afford to be in the US and get all the money you could get from your domains without having to pay, especially if you have tax treaty with the US, because they don't need fiscal presence. So the question becomes, why are we having these lapses? You could see why the US may not be interested in setting rules that will enable you to tax those revenues here in Africa. And there are other instances, the BEPS are still there. There is IFFs, which is taking away much more than we are getting from official development assistance. So these are the challenges which gives impetus for the work that the African group is pushing at the UN. And the African group is saying, we are not doing this just for Africa. We believe that inclusivity and equity brings about effectiveness. We want a system like Madam Chinamasa mentioned that will enable my minister from Nigeria to be part of these decisions, to point at the peculiar issues that Africans have in the context of the discussion. So I want to use the opportunity to employ all of us to have focus, to give it the desired attention and the urgency that it needs for the push to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Chepelai. I'm a technical advisor to Badea President. I would like to be a little bit provocative when it comes to inclusiveness. So as a matter of fact, when we discuss inclusiveness today, the issue some very elite one, disconnected to the mainstream. And I'm gonna explain that. Tax is not a popular issue. When it comes to inclusiveness, if we look at our own country, our own citizens, I think this can be one of the issues where many will feel comfortable to not be included in the tax basket. So the issue I'm trying to raise here is it might help actually for our Minister of Finance, for our government, to actually extend the tax basket. In as much as every citizen can contribute to tax, that can get the citizen engaged and pushing some tax activism. If young people who are getting as little as they can pay a little, I think this can help them to be more demanding and ask more. And to that extent, I think these multinational operating around, in our countries, they may feel the pressure from the mass who are contributing. In as much as people are contributing less, we are discussing about tax, we are discussing about illicit financial flows. These feel disconnected. They don't feel really interested because they don't know the pain or the commitment related to paying tax. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have the panelists available afterwards because we are very constrained in time, but I'd like to give 1 minute to each of you to respond to some of the issues that have been raised before we close. Can we perhaps start with you, Mary? And if I can ask you to be brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and for the opportunity. I'll go quickly to the issues that were raised by the Honorable Minister. And I want to say, Honorable Minister, it's interesting that you talk about the domestic minimum top-up tax. And I think actually Zimbabwe is a trailblazer on that because it's definitely going to help. And it's one of the areas that we've been helping the other countries. I think people in the room may not know, but ATAF pioneered in developing the suggested approach to designing a domestic minimum top-up tax. But in relation to the issue you raised, we also do have some tools that we have, guidance on VAT treatment on e-commerce and digital services. And we have a couple of countries that we have supported in introducing domestic digital services taxes to help them, address some of these issues. I also want to say that, Chair, to address the issue of capacity. And the issue of capacity for our negotiators, as highlighted by different speakers, is a critical one. But I want to say that we need to learn from our past. In the process that we have been undergoing, both the countries and even the different stakeholders have developed capacity. So we do have capacity at the continental level. And ATAF, as I said, has developed a couple of suggested approaches, but I want to say two key issues. There are some at the Secretariat, but there are also some in the countries. And we have what we call the Cross-Border Taxation Technical Committee that Daniel knows very well that can support this process. So we needn't worry, we are going into this strong, and we have all it takes, but we just need to be coordinated. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks. If we can move to the Honorable Secretary of State.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hannah. I think it's very important to work together, to have the same voice in our continent, to share the experience like I talked before. That's why I want to thank Mr. Minister for suggesting us this experience. Thank you so much.
Daniel.
Thank you. And there were one or two questions that came. The country-by-country reporting is something which we can look at. It's already there, but it's limited actually to those in a global forum. So it's something that this can help expand. The issue of, and Minister talked about some interesting issue, the indirect transfers, the underlying ownership. Basically, Ghana has put in some laws that allows us to do that. We can always share that one. And then on the other side, in terms of the revenue from the digital economy, the VAT, yes, is quite common, but when it comes to the actual revenue, we have a provision in our law that says that any payment sourced from Ghana is income earned in Ghana. Basically, it sort of resolves it to a certain point. There'll be some additions, but these are things that I think we can continue. But then the most important thing, and the ES mentioned it, is for us to prepare together once we are doing these negotiations. it is very, very important that our ministers, in terms of looking at tax, just tax, we come together in that sense. And so that's what I really liked about it, that coordination is very important for our negotiators. Thank you.
Thanks. Jamal.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Allow me first of all really to salute and express my deep thanking really for the comment that came from the floor, especially the one from the UNECA Executive Secretary, to whom really we adhere to your modus operandi, the way we should really lobby. And I totally agree with you. It's at the G77, definitely. It's at the African group ambassadors in New York. It's at our level. It means UNECA will be part of all this. And I would like just to take this opportunity to salute again my dear colleagues, Dr. Adam and Dr. Gamar. They are doing a fantastic work with us. This is one. The second, when I listen very carefully to His Excellency, the Minister of Finance of Zimbabwe, my only plea is let us really coordinate whatever you decide about taxes at the regional level and the continental level. The top-up domestic tax, I think you're talking about 15, we would like to go for 21%. And it's about really bringing all the countries applying the same. We don't want that you apply 15, the other apply 10, and then you start to see the leakages elsewhere at the regional. It's very important to coordinate regional and continental and to enforce the decision. I think this is something very important. Last but not least, my commissioner, just to make it very clear, during the last G20, it's happened, I think, a few days ago, the IFA, what we call the FMC, the finance minister and the central bank governor meeting at the G20. So this is his statement. So he said, as part of the process of promoting inclusiveness, we also advocate for dialogue to move toward a United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. This would build on the G20 OECD Inclusive Framework on base erosion and profit shifting. A United Nations legal instrument would be more inclusive is currently the base. In this respect, we also call for a dialogue between the United Nations and the OECD on the issue of international tax reform. So this was really his plea. He made it clear to the G20, and this is the way we should be working all together. UNECA with AUC toward the UN and the G77, as mentioned by this clustering, how we should really support them, and the G20, how to voice out our position. And I think, I have really to make it very, as a personal view, that this is the first time that AU, the African Union, is talking about this position. It did never happen by the past because South Africa sitting alone there was very difficult for them, really. And I want really to make it again very clear. Negotiations at the G20 are very difficult, very, very tough. And I can tell you, it's even for us as sitting now today is very problematic because we need sometimes to choose which side we should go with. Is it the OECD led by the US or the China, or this is again very difficult for us going forward. But again, this is the first time that the commissioner, who's at the same time he's the chair of the G20, was officially, he made it clear. And I think moving forward, we need really to collaborate, build on this kind of first successes, really between the G20, how we should channel our voice, the G77, the African ambassador, and as mentioned by His Excellency, again, our ambassador in Addis Ababa. We need really to connect them with the one in New York. And I thank you again, Madam Chair.
Many thanks. If we can move, Commissioner Regina.
Thank you. I think my comment and plea probably going forward is just to look at issues of capacitation and also to ensure that as we go forward, I think issues of how do we create the synergy between taxing rights and capacity to enforce those rules. So I think from a tax administration, I'm excited with the way forward, but I think like what other members have said, this is a fight. Taxation is a tool, which is more than just revenue mobilization. It's also a political tool, and we really need that political support for us to go forward. Thank you.
Many thanks. Professor?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think, Prof, you are still being a professor even as you are a minister. Some of us are going to have to learn a lot about DMTT and how it is being enforced. We might be coming to you to learn some more on that one. About the establishment of laws, you know, the way we are taught the language about good versus bad laws, I think this is something that we all have to come to the realization that a law is not bad as long as it is helping you as a country. So the Global North dangles this thing. They say that they are investors, so you don't enact bad laws. If you enact bad laws, investors are not going to come. This thing of thinking that investors are only those from the Global North, I think it's high time that we need to get rid of that. Otherwise, we are not going to get anywhere. The chair is looking at me. I'm finishing with this, that I think we do have the capacity in terms of ICT within Africa. We have the capacity. If some young man somewhere is clicking a button on YouTube, on WhatsApp, whatever, people know for every click, maybe we should be getting something out of that. We can't just be watching. We know it's possible. I think it's high time that we enacted such a bad law that says that for every click, we want to get some revenues out of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chennai.
Thank you very much. I'll just respond to 2 points that were raised. I think the first one around general public interest in the question of tax. I think there is something to be said about how we need to strengthen the social contract in our African countries. One of the things that we found as civil society is that you'd actually be surprised, but the extent to which you communicate the role of tax to the general public, you actually are able to find increased interest on the part of the average citizen within the tax debate. For example, when you flag that they are paying X amount of tax vis-a-vis, for example, a multinational corporation or a high net worth individual who may have an effective tax rate of, say, 0.5%. These are some of the strategies we use at national level to ensure that the conversation around tax is inclusive and in a way is then able to contribute to improved tax systems when you're able to raise public demand for the same. The second comment I just want to make is in response to the point that was raised by the ES. Indeed, I think coordination is going to be incredibly important given what lies ahead of us. Already, I know Daniel can mention that at the organizational session, there was already a lot of pushback from countries that currently hold power within the global financial architecture. And the only way we are going to be able to respond to that is if we coordinate amongst ourselves, if we coordinate within New York with the capitals, the G77, and doing so requires concentrated effort. I am pleased to say, though, that the only way we've been able to reach to where we are is because the AU has been leading that charge. The 2 resolutions that were adopted were largely because of the coordination efforts under the AU. But suffice to say, this will need to increase. And so absolutely, I agree on this point. And I think there's a lot of strategies that can be thought about how to do so. Thank you very much, Dr. Hanan.
Thank you. It's just like, it's impossible for me to summarize this in any way that will do justice to the rich and insightful discussion that we had. If I have to say, like, you know, a 2-line takeaway is, for me, is the need that we need to shift the conversations that we're having. We cannot be going and begging for money while we're losing 2.5 times what we're asking for. So let's focus on what matters. Let's go prepared, build the capacity of our negotiators, coordinate well, and speak in one voice. And finally, we need to advocate at the highest political levels, advocate, advocate, advocate. I really want to express my deep appreciation and gratitude for the phenomenal panel that we've had and the very rich discussion. And I'd like to ask you to give them a strong round of applause. Thank you. Thanks. We can move to the next item then.